Hello everyone. Hi. Good morning. Good evening, guys. So we'll wait for 5 more minutes or 2 more minutes so that we can start the session. Great. Victoria, Isha, can we start?
Yeah, let's start. Let's kick off.
Yep, yep,
Okay,
indeed.
great. Hey, thanks everyone, and welcome to August month's office hours. Just to remind everyone, this session is being recorded and it is going to be available in the YouTube channel. So I'm just getting the consent here, right? So, getting into the introduction part, so myself, Pradeep Arunraj, I work as an enterprise architect in Nextro Digital. I was a part of Adobe Analytics Champion this year. This is a pilot year for me. My primary job is mostly onboarding analytics for almost most of the clients, and had an experience of 11 years right now. Working with Adobe closely, working with Adobe community closely for nearly 7 years, having a lot of certifications and everything. Right now, I'm in Chennai, working in Chennai, but my head office is there in Chicago. It's a quick intro about myself. Victoria, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, thanks, Pradeep. So I'm Victoria. I'm the product owner of Adobe Analytics at National Australian Bank. So I'm based in Melbourne. It's actually 8 p.m. In my time zone. So in terms of my experience with Adobe, I am lucky enough to got experience across the whole Adobe Marketing Cloud, including like analytics, target, like audience manager, campaign, everything. But Adobe Analytics definitely my favorite. So I'm also one of the 40 global champion this year. So we're honored to be partnering with the other two very talented champion tonight. So with that, I'll hand over to Aisha to give us an introduction of herself.
Thanks, Victoria and Pradeep. So I am Isha. I'm currently working as a digital analytics lead for Three Ireland, and I'm currently residing in Dublin, Ireland. My day-to-day job involves everything Adobe Analytics. So I'm literally single person managing entire implementation, reporting, and everything. And it is a good infrastructure. I have been working in Adobe Analytics for last 11 years. And I think if you are not aware of Prateep's blogs of Terran Winter, I think you should go check it out because they have helped me a lot in my earning my certifications. And I think those are definitely good ones. So yeah, and I am it was first year of being a champion for me as well, and it has been thoroughly a good experience. I have just started to increase my engagement on community as well, so it's a good experience, and I'm happy to have you all here. So we can start with
Great,
the
Isha.
questions, Pradeep.
Thank you. Okay, so we already received a few questions and we also picked a few questions from Adobe Experience League. We want to start, so we'll go with this order. First, I will put the comments for Victoria and then Isha, and then at the end I will go for it. Right? I already added few comments, but still, right? I want to go last so that I can hear everyone and I can put my thought onto it. Right? Okay. The first question is related to auto export in workspace, right? So the question goes like this: how do we ensure that the auto exported data from Adobe Workspace report matches the data on Workspace? We export weekly data at midnight, and then when we try to match the numbers the next day, the numbers is not matching, right? The usual one, right? So, any comments on this, Victoria?
Yeah, I think the setting is very similar in our according to my experience. Yes, there's 2 hour delay. I do want to call it out that potentially with the help of CJA, we might be able to reduce that latency. Um, but yes, 2 hours matches my experience with Adobe Analytics across different organizations. Isha, what do you think? What's your experience?
I think data latency is what it is mostly. So I think it's already explained, so I will not repeat the same thing again, and I will let Pradeep explain his comments.
Yeah, so yes, the important thing is related to latency, right? So not only just workspace. Yeah, I remember that when we were working on Adobe Analytics, right? Most of the time we don't include the current date, right? So whenever we work on any particular date, we try not to include the current date to make sure that the full data that is being collected is being reported and there is no deviation in terms of number. So if at all we are scheduling any particular report at 12 midnight, the point is there is a latency of let's say maximum of 2 hours or minimum of 45 minutes, right? Some variables like props are like fine, but if you think about EVAR, where you need to wait for the session end to complete and then to compute some of the numbers, it is not going to happen at the minute the day ends, right? So it needs some time to process all these data, and the data is available in workspace. So definitely it is not going to be like 100% accurate because you are not including a data which is not there in workspace for 2 hours, right? So rather than scheduling it at 12 a.m. or else 12:30 a.m., the option here is we can go and schedule it like after 2 a.m., right? Usually we have like tendency to schedule it at 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. That's how it works. So that is a one of the reason why there is a mismatch in the numbers. But yeah, but this is the usual one, right? But there is also one important point we need to understand is, let's say you have a mobile application and you have some of the offline tracking enabled. Often there are cases, right? People go and engage with your mobile app while they are in offline mode. And all these server calls which you want to send it to Adobe Analytics for tracking might be queued in their system or in their mobile application. And when they come to online, all these server calls, right, will start to fire, and Adobe need to capture all these events as well, right? If timestamp is enabled. So those cases as well, there might be some changes in terms of number because it is going and filling the back data. But this need not to be the case that the numbers, right? It should match ideally. It should be like 1 or 2% mismatch is completely fine. But if it is higher, then the time difference is something we need to think through. But other than that, I don't think so. There would be a difference between the automated report or scheduled report versus the workspace we see. So yeah, that's the comment here. Okay, let's get into the next one. So again, to this time, I can see that all these questions are like really generic, right? It is not talking to a particular point, right? Rather, it is like really generic, and that is why I love some of the questions that is being asked. So generic and logical here. So second question is related to data integration and management. Could you elaborate the best practices for integrating Adobe Analytics data with your website and application? I would start with Victoria, but still, Victoria, if at all, right, in addition to Adobe Analytics, if you want to give any advice related to CJA, I would also love to hear that because they are talking about the integration and management. So CJA is one of the best option for it, right? That's my understanding. So if you can have some thoughts on it, I would also love to hear.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether we got like the person actually asking this question on this call to kind of provide some clarifications on like what does it mean in terms of like like what's the actual detail about this integration. But if you're talking about like capturing like the website or app behavior data, and in terms of the best practice on that, I can share some experience. I think if we talk about best practice, I will always say that the first thing is to understand like the KPI, because I do believe like Adobe Analytics is a it sits within Adobe Marketing Cloud, is a marketing technology. So I always think the first priority is to serve a particular business purpose, business case. So in terms of, so that's why I think um, have a clear understanding of the KPI that should lead to a clear like analytics implementation strategy. So like, what do you want to know about your customers? Like, is it conversion? Is it about brand awareness, or maybe it's more? Be clear on that. Or do you want to use Adobe Analytics for your media measurement, trying to connect your paid media with your digital interaction data? Just be very clear on that. To set up your tracking and implementation strategy. So always starting from a business requirement first. I think the second one is I'm sure Isha will, and Pradeep yourself will add a lot more as well on other aspects. I think the other one I do want to call it out is be very clear about the like the privacy and compliance, because the privacy regulations are changing every day, and just be very cautious about what you want to collect on your website, on your app, or even from like integrate your CMS with your Adobe Analytics. Be very clear about what you can and cannot capture. Be very cautious about that part. Keep yourself up to date with the latest regulations in your area. So, for example, Europe or US are relatively well established in that space, while APAC is still catching up. So the regulations might be different across those regions. So I do want to put it out to take that into consideration when you are thinking about integrating Adobe Analytics with your other systems like CMS or like offline data source, things like that. So with that, I'll hand over to Isha to share some of her experience here. I think Isha might have some connection issue. Pradeep,
Yeah.
do you mind to take over?
Okay. Yes, I would definitely agree with Victoria on when we say integration and management. I'm also pretty not sure what sort of integration being asked here, because integration is two-way around, right? One way of integration which I'm looking into it when we think about website or application is integrating to your content migration system or mobile application for data collection purpose. The next one might be, let's say you want to show some of the numbers that has already been collected in real time in Adobe Analytics or any analytics tool. You want to showcase those numbers for some purpose, right? That is also an integration, right? The reporting side of it. So there are two ways to look into it. The first way of integrating Adobe Analytics for data collection pieces, yes, we need to start with the goals. We need to break it down with the KPIs and then to variables and then dimensions, right? So once we have everything, then some of the configuration we need to do from analytics end. But from the integration point of view with website, the primary integration is placing the Adobe Analytics library code, right, on the content migration system for data collection. So usually it is done via a tag manager, but it need not to be the case that it has to be tag manager. Earlier, before 10 years, right, we were not using tag manager and we were using all the libraries, right? So making sure that the integration is done in such a way that all your pages are fetching this launch code or launch embed code if at all you have multiple properties, then you can also go and configure a content migration system to dynamically populate all these properties based on your sites that is being hosted in CMS, right? So there are some of the admin configuration things which we can do in CMS, anything, right? That too, AEM has a cool capability in terms of retrieving all these properties that is there in tax data collection and give you as a like give you as a enum value or like a drop down where you can go and select this whenever a site is selected, right? So that integration is something which we can do. And from the data collection point of view, again, one more cooler integration recently we see is, right, addition of metadata, right? How do you manage the data layer? Because if you have a proper data layer that is there in CMS, then data collection is going to be super quicker for you. And rather than you go and work on screen scraping or DOM scraping, right, or any other transaction API which is feasible quantity, we can do a lot of wonders. So one of the thing which I would also say is plan this metadata properly. Make sure that you use, I would say that open schemas, right? Even if it is AEP is open schema. Plan the schema properly, implement your data layers in such a way that the integration is much more quicker and data collection is like solar, right? So there is also a Adobe Summit session. I can paste the link over here. You can go through it whenever you get time, right? It will give you some ways, right, how the metadata can be managed in such case, which can be really helpful in terms of integrating CMS with analytics, right? So that's my first take from the data collection point of view. The second part is, yes, reporting, right? Let's say if at all we want to do some good reporting to showcase in our displays, right, or else some campaigns counters and everything. If that is the case, earlier we were using reporting API 1.4, and recently most of us are using Adobe Workspace API 2.0, where you can just send a query and get a response and put the numbers, right? So the numbers can be real time as well if at all you are using a real time API. So there are a lot of options from the integrations point of view, and the use cases also really like elaborated here. Multiple use case from the data collection or multiple use case from the visualization point of view is also there. So based on what is important for business, where business is like really struggling to get those use cases, we need to ensure that these integration best practices are like followed, and then we take it to the elevated level, right? So that's my take here. Isha, do you want to go? I guess right now you are in mute. Okay, I guess that is still internet issues. Victoria, so when they say integration, right? One way is collecting the data directly using a WebSDK or app measurement. But since because AEP is also evolving, right? And when we think about analytics data, even the CJ data is what I'm presuming. In that particular note, what sort of integration we can do with CMS to AEP, right, for CJA purposes? Any thoughts on it?
I think for CJA, so I think compared to like if we want to compare CJA versus Adobe Analytics, I think one thing CJA does offer is the kind of more flexibility in terms of the data sources. So I do know like CJA, because it's integrated with AEP, which means from data source perspective, we have much more flexibility, not only from offline data source perspective, but like use cases like combining web and app data, like integrating with customer like CMS data, and also even for media data. So for example, it can using the API, it can connect like media data like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. So basically creating a centralized place for everything. So I think CJ does offer some flexibility on that compared to Adobe Analytics, but really to do with, I think, business needs. Some business really needs CJ's help to do data integration with everything, to have Adobe Analytics as a centralized place for everything. Sorry, to have CJA as a centralized place for everything, while for some other business potentially they may not need that advanced level of use cases, and Adobe Analytics is sufficient enough for them. So really about the business case, but yes, CJA does offer more flexibility from a data source perspective. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So from the integration point of view, from the website or mobile, it's a different case. But if at all we want to take this to a data lake, and the CJ has multiple options right now, as you said, right? So we can directly put all the Adobe Analytics data and fit into AEP, and we can combine multi-channel data and do any sort of visualization, right? Might be downstream level integrations, but yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Victoria. Good to know. Okay. Next part is, I guess, this is something which people started buzzing a lot. Handling GDPR compliance and PA data in Adobe Analytics. So, what's your thought process here?
So first of all, I like to call out I'm in APAC. I'm definitely not expert in terms of GDPR. As I mentioned before, we're still catching up in the privacy space. But I think this is a very good question. So I think first of all is to to answer this question is first of all is to have a very comprehensive understanding of the GDPR compliance. I would really, so because I'm sitting in a bank, so actually we do have a very powerful, very strong legal privacy and data ethics team. So we do consult them every now and then. So I would highly recommend everyone do the same. If you do have the resource, do consult your internal legal and data privacy and ethics team. I think the other one is ideally, if we're talking about Adobe Analytics particular, I would personally try to minimize the collection or avoid the collection of PII data in the first place. Things like first name, last name, email address, phone number, I would really recommend to avoid collecting and ingest, feeding into your. I think the minimum will be hashed. Like everything needs to be hashed as a minimum treatment. But I do want to, that's my personal opinion, that I try to avoid sending or storing PII in Adobe Analytics. And also, I think it's about also setting up like user access in terms of different reporting, like who has what level of access, especially if you're sharing Adobe Analytics instance with your agency, like external agency. I do recommend setting a very structured user access level to share before sharing your reports with external stakeholders. So I think that's something on the top of my mind. I'm more than happy to pass over to you, Prateek, to share more about your view.
Yes. So as you said, I'm also coming from APAC region, but I mostly work with all the US clients. So from the data privacy and compliance point of view, there are multiple things to be taken care. So I just listed down few things. So there are three pillars related to whenever anybody say either it is a GDP or it's a CCPA, right? So I remember there are three pillars, which is consent, access and delete, and then activation. So activation piece, I guess Victoria already discussed, right? So if at all we have a data, how do we need to set an alert? How do we need to make sure that we are not accidentally sending any data to a third party systems, right? So we have few important enablements in Adobe Analytics, like data retention can be done, and there are data usage label policies where you can go and just mark each and every dimension or even event, right, labels, put sensitive, right, and all these categories we can do, so that at any time, if at all there is any integration from Adobe Analytics to any other system, then these data are not leaked and these data are not passed over to other systems, right? So that is from the activation point. But all the first is related is consent for me. So collecting the consent is one of the important factor to consider here. So do Adobe Analytics has its capability? Then I would call it as yes, because even it is an app measurement or you are doing a data collection using Web SDK, there is an option where you can get the consent, and based on the consent you can trigger the server calls, right? So all the extension of Adobe Analytics, and importantly the Vista API extension of Adobe Analytics, has this particular capability where you can ensure that none of the cookies or none of the data is being collected without a consent. It can be opt-in mechanism or it can be opt-out mechanism. Both the cases, the flexibility is there, so that until the consent is given, the data is not being collected. And the second one is, yes, multiple times, if at all we are using multiple plugins like Activity Map and some other plugin related to cookie or click, there is an option that we accidentally collect the PII data, right? So that can be an email ID, first name, last name, it can be a phone number, it can be something, right, on clickable actions. How to ensure that we don't track it? So the first best way is avoid DOM scraping. That is something which we are pushing. I guess everybody are pushing over the period of time, right? If you ask. So having a proper data layer structure, having a proper schema can avoid all these limitations, because you are not scraping any data. Rather, you are building the components on your CMS system with the metadata that is essential for you, right? And so the accidental capture of all these data can be avoided. On some of the cases, even if you use any of the activity map plugins, some of the cases you can also do a custom coding. Let's say if at all I don't want to collect a mail ID, you can go and do a custom coding saying that, hey, if anything has at Gmail, or else you can have some sort of rules where you can avoid it. But if you think about first name and last name, there is no option for you to write add a custom code. So having the proper data layer structure is again important, and that is why having these metadata properly onto your content migration system is important, and that is how I see consent, right? So get the consent, capture it, and let's say in unavoidable circumstances, if you have already collect the data, what GDPR and CCPI is saying is, hey, people can go and request for accessing their data that has been captured on their website or their browser, and if they ask for a deletion, any particular business should help, right, take the request and delete the data, right? So even for the access and delete request, Adobe is completely supporting, and Adobe has a separate service which is a privacy service or privacy API, where at any time, if at all we want to delete any of the data that has been already collected in Adobe Analytics, we can also send a request to Adobe, so that that can be deleted, and in return we can respond to the customer, right? So that option is also there. But as a APAC side, these are just understanding right now. But if you think about US markets, almost consent is already there, and we see that many cases access and delete request is right now not being completely implemented, but it is going to be in a year or in 2 years is what I presume. So understanding consent, access and delete request with the activation, right? So all these three can help in terms of complying and then making sure that the data is private and secure. Okay, we have the last question. Integrate offline data for a holistic view. How can Adobe Analytics integrate offline data for a holistic view? Are there tools or best practices for merging online and offline data sources? Victoria?
Yep. So I think basically, first of all, the easiest way for Adobe Analytics will be, for example, data warehouse. You can ingest, like send daily files being ingested into Adobe Analytics. So from a bank perspective, like one use case or example I can share is like, for example, from a website or app perspective, we can see this customer submitting online applications. However, because in terms of actual approval or rejection, that happens actually offline. Like, for example, there will be like system or bankers actually actively reviewing those applications. So the decision will only be made like later down the track. So that means if we're only reporting on like application start, from business objective perspective, potentially it actually doesn't bring too much value to us, because by the end of the day, we really want to focus more on the like how many applications actually approved, and if being rejected, like what's wrong with the user journey. So that means for us, it's important to ingest offline like approval or rejection data, like basically decision made on those applications into Adobe Analytics. So we can then perform like data analysis on, hey, so this is the actual final outcome, the business outcome. How to perform analysis backwards to see where went wrong. Like, for example, is it from a particular media um, investment? Is it because there's a huge drop off between web and app? Or is it the whole application flow somewhere went wrong? So rather than only have access to the digital application start, that click level visibility, by ingesting like the offline approval data into Adobe Analytics, actually give us a much more business-centric view and to bring more insights to the wider business. So I think so that's one use case I can share. I want to use that to basically share my advice, is really see a link back to what I shared answering the first question, is about the business need. Like think about like what are you really trying to achieve out of your digital analytics implementation, and have a think about, is digital analytics sufficient enough for you, or actually it will bring much more business value when you combine the offline, like your sales or your application, other offline data with your digital interaction data to have the full journey. So like data warehouse, and then like the CJ example will be using the CJ data source API to ingest offline or like paid media data into CJA to have a centralized view. So yes, so that's the CJ example, is using APIs, use the data source APIs, and for Adobe Analytics using data warehouse. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Great to know the super use case for banking sector, right? So if at all we need to understand the end-to-end journey, it is always easier for us, right? So from the web tracking point of view, start till submission can be tracked in online. But after that, there is also process, right? So you need to go and approve the credit card, and then there is also some checks that will be happening, and then dispatching, right? So if at all we need to understand all the offline events, then it is important for us to add all these data to Adobe Analytics so that we can understand the end-to-end customer journey, right? The onboarding customer time, right? It is a very good KPI for us to know, right? Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, from the integration point of view, how do we want to add the offline data? So use cases, already we have one use cases, and if at all we want to extend our use cases, right, for e-commerce side, if there is a return policy, right, if there is anything which is done from the offline point of view, or if there is a call center calls, right, or any other interactions related to POS, let's say we have all these data and we want to add it to Adobe Analytics from the offline point of view, what are the options? So if we want to add any data to Adobe Analytics, the first important criteria which we need to think through is whether the data is a record data or else a time series data. So example I can give for time series data is the age, right? If you think about the age, so age is going to be changing every year. So it is dependent on time, right? So it is not just a record of data. But if you think about the name and for a customer, right? So it is just the same name until there is a different case altogether, right? So record data is nothing but a simple metadata or a lookup data for an campaign ID. You have the campaign metrics or campaign metadata need to be added. It's a simple record data. But for a time series data like submission, you have a submission ID, or else you have the credit card approval reference number being captured. So if that is the case, all these are time series data. Sometimes we need to add it. So based on the data, you need to go for the options that is available in Adobe Analytics. If it's a record data, then you can directly use classification. Here it is called a same classification. You have the value being captured already. You just need to add all the metadata with an identifier using a root builder, or else as an input, right? And if it is a customer related data, you can also use customer attributes. I guess there is a limit of 3 to 5 for a standard package, and it is much more than for the premium package, right? So classifications and customer source are the two ways how we can import the data to Adobe Analytics from the offline point of view. And for the time series data, the old practice is something, right? We use data source interface where we can go and add all the data, all the metadata, events, and everything, right? So data source is one of the data source and data source API, right? Both together is one of the option where we can go and add metadata, offline data to Adobe. And we also have data insertion API and bulk data insertion API, right? Because data source will be valid if you already have a data and you want to add some other data into it, right? Let's say you want to add an event, you want to add some other metadata for an already captured variable, then data source will be really useful. But if you want to inject a new complete new data source to Adobe Analytics separately as a separate line item, then it has to be from data insertion or bulk data insertion. But when we think about CJA point of view, all these efforts in terms of uploading the data and everything is just completely different, right? So we have connectors, we have a lot of other streaming APIs, right, where we can ingest all these data directly to AEP, and with AEP as a data lake, CJ can do wonders, right? So yeah, from analytics, these are the options we have. So understanding which type of data we want to upload or import to Adobe Analytics, and which option we need to select, if at all it's a record series or if it is going to be a time series data, right? So this is how we can integrate, and this is how we need to think through based on the business requirement or use case that is being requested for you. Okay, all right, we have completed some of the big topics. So do we have any questions from the chat?
Yeah, Pradeep, I think Mandy has shared one question from the group. So what are some of the common questions or issues that you get from users in your organization?
Okay, so do you want to take it first, Victoria?
I've been taking first this night, so I feel guilty.
I will take it. I
Like,
will take it.
feel free to take the lead on this one and add more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. For most of the time, from the user's point of view, so I just want to segregate this question two ways, right? So first one is from the data governance point of view. Another one is the data usage point of view. From the data governance point of view, one of the common questions most of the time I hear as an enterprise architect is, hey, how do you manage all these users, right? We were giving user access for multiple people. We were trying to export lot of data warehouse requests. We were trying to do a lot of integrations or workspace reports, right? Which is sending the data to people, right? So there are multiple things that is happening from an analytics point of view. So the question is most of the time for me is, how do you govern it? Right? Data governance is one of the important fact, right, or important item when we think, right, or when we are architecting a particular analytic solution. So what are the ways? How do you want to give access for the people? And how do we need to maintain it, right? So what are the profile access we can give? How from the role based access we need to give, right? So from the user management point of view, as an architect, how feasible for us to handle all these requests, and how we can how we can help people to ensure that they are getting right access and they are using Adobe Analytics for a period of time, right? Because few people will just take the access, and most of the time they don't even open workspace, right? So to understand what is their usage and what they are doing and how to manage all these from the governance point of view is one of the common issues and questions that is being there. And it is purely about setting a proper operations is what my take is, right? So you need to have a proper intake form or raid log form, right, where these can be captured and stored as an inventory, so that at any time or whenever you are giving any access, make sure that you are giving access for like not more than 2 years, so that after 2 years if somebody is like really inactive, it can be like opted out, right? So some of the governance things which we can do from the governance point of view. But from the reporting and usage point of view, one of the common question which I ask is, I guess Victoria, you would also get into the situation, right? Why Adobe Analytics data is not matching with the server data warehouse, right? The data here in Adobe Analytics is something else, but data there in my server is something else, right? This is one of the common question people ask. The submission that is there in Adobe Analytics is 100, but in my server it is 200, right? Or 150, right? So comparison of data between their own enterprise database versus Adobe Analytics, right? So this is the question. But for them, what I usually say is, we are sending the data from the data collection point of view. We are sending the data to a different server, right? So we are loading some .com, right? Let's say citibank.com or else flipkart.com, and when we load it, we are sending the data to a different server, adobe analytics.com, right? So there is a cross server. Many browsers with the privacy and all these compliance and everything, right, the privacy issues, right, browsers and with the Apple Safari, all the ITP protocols, multiple cases are often these calls are blocked by the servers. But if we think about all the submission that is happening at their own data warehouse, it is about same server, and none of the time, right, these are blocked. But if it's a different server, and if any of the organization is having multiple website, and if people are navigating between these websites, then even third party cookie is playing a huge role. And with the deprecation of third party cookies and ITP protocols suppressing the third party cookie for all these cross domain, right, it is impossible for us to say that, or it is not possible for us to say that our data collection is like 100 percentage, right? So data collection for me is always 90 to 95 percentage. The 10 percentage is often for me is varying. So what we need to look into is not the exact number that has been compared against your server versus Adobe Analytics, rather the trend, rather the behavior. If we start understanding what is the difference between two data, then we are missing out one of the important purpose of analytics, which is understanding the data and getting insights, right? So most of the time we run into all these matching of numbers, implementation issues, right? All the downstream activities, but we don't think about the value portion of it, which is getting insights, understanding an anomaly, creating some of the cool alerts, right? And then how do we take recommendations, a hypothesis where we can create some or innovate something, right? So if we concentrate on all these part, these important value decisions might be like we might not even get into it. So the point here is, just go with the trend. If the data discrepancy is 10 to 15 percentage, it's completely fine. It is how it would be. So we don't have an option right now in any particular technology space. That is how it is. But if the difference is more than, let's say, 30, 35 percentage or 40 percentage, then definitely there is something to do with the implementation or some sort of methodology which we are doing in terms of tracking, right? So we need to ensure that the data collection is proper. We are not down counting the number or up counting, right? So all these validation has to be done and ensure that we are good, right? So these are the common questions which I usually um, get to in my organization, or even with all the people who are there in community out there, right? So that is there. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very comprehensive answer and covered so many of the common questions, common issues already. I may just add one more in terms of, I think one common issues I faced across different organizations I have worked for in the past. I think it's about, so the common setup I noticed about an Adobe Analytics implementation and how Adobe Analytics works for the wider business is usually there's like a website dev team, there's one Adobe digital analytics implementation team, and there are also like business practitioners sitting in a separate team. So I think the larger the organization is, the more various teams it become, and you'll see like people are sitting across like different teams and departments. Sometimes like actually the small organizations has the benefit of like this relatively small team, and I think Isha mentioned is like she's one does it all. Like that means she actually got visibility across everything, has all the context. But for bigger organization, I notice is people sitting in different teams, and there's definitely some miscommunication across those teams. Like sometimes the website team makes a change, forgot to inform the implementation team, which means like the new forms, new pages are not being captured, and that would ended up with data discrepancy in the downstream, and the business practitioners couldn't make sense of the data. So I think the more the organizations you sit in, the I think the priority sits with setting up SOAP for your analytics from like the upstream implementation data collection side to the downstream, like the business practitioners and the data analysts, to set up a SOAP of how you manage change. So the bigger your organization is, I think the more important this SOAP means for you to make sure you actually maximize your investment on Adobe Analytics. I think that's one thing I want to add.
Perfect. Nice to know. Yeah, I just shared the link related to the metadata management, right, which has been presented in Adobe Summit this year. It's, whenever you get time, you can look into it. So, do we have any other questions right now? I'm just checking my chat. Okay, then we are good. We are closing the monthly hour 10 minutes before. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Victoria, for your lovely company. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prateep. And thank you. I want to call out Mandy. George has been the one sitting in the background, helping make sure all the tech setup is seamless. So thank you, Mandy. So if there's no further questions, we may